Jax's revenge domain. I gripped my portfolio tighter as Patricia Williams stepped right in front of me, blocking my path to the Hamilton conference room like a bouncer at an exclusive club. The morning sun was streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows, lighting up the empty chairs and that polished table where I'd planned to prep my presentation. "Excuse me, but is there a problem here?" I asked, pulling out my phone to show her the digital reservation confirmation. "I booked this room 3 days ago through the system." Pat's lips curved into this smirk I'd been watching for 3 weeks now. Her pearl necklace caught the light as she straightened up, using every inch of her height advantage. "This space," she said, tapping one manicured finger against the door frame, "is reserved for senior faculty only." Her eyes swept over my simple gray suit and practical shoes, lingering on the temporary ID badge that just said, "Timothy Rodriguez, Research Division." "Not for people at your level. Let me back up here. My name is Tim Rodriguez. I'm 48 years old, and I've spent the last 20 years turning around failing operations in Fortune 500 companies. But this fight wasn't just about business efficiency for me. 2 years ago, I watched my former colleague Maria Santos, brilliant woman, PhD in biochemistry, get systematically pushed out of a research position at another institute because she wouldn't play politics. She ended up leaving science entirely, now teaching high school chemistry. Watching someone that talented get destroyed by institutional bias left a mark on me. When the Westfield Research Institute board brought me in as their new director, it wasn't just about fixing broken systems. It was personal. The board had given me one specific mission: figure out why their top talent kept walking out the door and their innovation pipeline had dried up like a desert well. But I'd made them agree to one condition before I took the job. Give me 3 weeks to observe the place from the inside, no announcements, no special treatment, just let me see how things really worked when nobody was putting on a show for the new boss. Now I was standing there, watching this administrative gatekeeper treat me like some junior intern who'd wandered into the wrong building. Heat crept up my neck, but I kept my voice level. The online system showed availability, no mention of rank restrictions. Pat sighed like she was dealing with a particularly slow child. 20 years I've maintained standards at this institute. 20 years of excellence because we understand proper hierarchy. She gestured toward the elevator. Try the basement conference room. That's where new researchers work until they've proven themselves. The basement room. I'd been down there twice during my observation weeks. No windows, Wi-Fi that cut out every 10 minutes, chairs that squeaked like dying mice, and a persistent musty smell that made you want to hold your breath. Where good ideas went to suffocate. I could feel other faculty members pretending to check their phones nearby, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Dr. Brian Walsh and Dr. Kevin Mitchell, both department heads, had seen this dance before. Everyone had. But nobody said a word. Just like when Maria got pushed around at her old job. Next time, Pat called after me as I walked away, check with my office before making reservations. It'll save everyone time. I nodded without turning around and headed straight to my deliberately modest office at the end of the corridor. Only when I closed that door did I allow myself a small smile, glancing at the nameplate sitting face down on my desk, the one that would be installed tomorrow morning, the one that read Dr. Timothy Rodriguez, Director of Operations and Innovation. See, I'd built my career on patience. While other executives rushed into flashy restructures and quick fixes, I learned that real organizational change takes observation, planning, and perfect timing. At 48, I'd become known in corporate circles as the turnaround specialist, the guy companies called when their systems were broken beyond normal repair. The Westfield Research Institute had once been a powerhouse in biomedical research. Now it was bleeding talent faster than a punctured artery. The board chairman's voice had been desperate when he called me. Our best researchers are leaving for competitors. Grant applications have dropped 35% in 2 years. We need someone who can see what we're missing. What I discovered in those 3 weeks was worse than the statistics suggested. Innovation wasn't just stagnating, it was being systematically crushed. Resources flowed to a tight circle of senior researchers regardless of their actual results. Promising projects died in basement rooms while mediocre work with the right connections got prime facilities and funding. And sitting at the center of this whole mess was Patricia Williams, Administrative Director of Operations. Technically not a researcher herself, Pat had accumulated extraordinary power through her control of schedules, space allocation, and resource distribution. She decided whose grant applications got administrative support, which projects got showcased to visitors, and who received invitations to career-making conferences. For 20 years, she'd built an inner circle based on loyalty rather than results. Anyone who questioned the system found themselves without lab space, stuck with broken equipment, or buried under so much administrative paperwork they eventually just gave up and left, just like Maria had been forced to do. I'd watched it all from my tiny office, taking notes while brilliant young researchers got their voices cut off in meetings. I'd seen groundbreaking ideas dismissed without discussion, while weak proposals from Pat's favorites sailed through approval. Over the past 5 years, this place had lost 28 talented researchers, people who went on to make breakthroughs at competing institutions, while Westfield's own innovation metrics declined by 35%. Now, after my humiliating encounter in the hallway, I sat reviewing my notes one final time. Tomorrow's board meeting was going to be more interesting than anyone expected. And Pat Williams was about to learn that some systems aren't just broken, they need to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. Exactly 25 minutes after our hallway confrontation, there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I called, sliding my tablet into a drawer. Pat entered with that confident stride of someone used to controlling every room they walked into. Her practiced smile faltered slightly when she noticed my sparse office, deliberately chosen as the smallest available space in the research wing. "I wanted to personally welcome you," she began. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced since you arrived. I'm Patricia Williams, Administrative Director of Operations." Then her eyes landed on my nameplate, still sitting face down on the desk, partially visible from her angle. "What's that?" she asked, taking a step forward without being invited. I flipped the nameplate upright with deliberate slowness. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might actually faint. "Director of Operations and Innovation," she whispered, reading the title. "You're the new—" "The board announcement goes out tomorrow morning," I said calmly. I requested 3 weeks to observe normal operations before assuming my official role. She sank into the chair across from me, that pearl necklace trembling against her throat. "The conference room situation this morning was exactly the point," I interrupted. 3 weeks of seeing this institute as it truly functions rather than how it performs when leadership is watching. I could practically see her mind racing, calculating damage control strategies. She was already rewriting the morning's events, constructing alternate narratives where her actions served some greater institutional good. "Dr. Rodriguez," she began, her voice steadying as she regained composure, "in my 20 years here, I've developed systems that maintain our academic standards. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions about resource prioritization." "Interesting approach to prioritization," I said. "I've been particularly studying your basement conference room. Did you know it has water damage in 3 corners? Yet that's where Dr. Ashley Murphy's immunology research team was scheduled to meet last week." Her smile tightened. "Maintenance issues happen in any facility. I'll have that addressed immediately." "Along with the pattern of which researchers consistently receive substandard facilities," I continued. "Like Dr. Murphy, whose protein synthesis breakthrough was just licensed by 4 major pharmaceutical companies. She spent 8 months relegated to the basement despite producing results that generated more revenue than the rest of the institute combined." Pat's jaw tensed for just a moment before she forced another smile. "Individual cases don't reflect overall institutional patterns. I'd be happy to walk you through our allocation methodologies tomorrow." The charm was returning. Her recovery was almost impressive. She'd outlasted 3 previous directors I knew, each time adapting and aligning until she could gradually shape institutional culture back to her preferred hierarchy. "I look forward to tomorrow's board meeting," I said, offering nothing more. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Shall I have facilities move your things to the director's office this afternoon?" "No need. I'll work from here until after tomorrow's meeting." Confusion flickered across her face, but she nodded graciously. "As you wish. And please, feel free to use the Hamilton room whenever you'd like. I'll personally ensure it's always available." "That won't be necessary," I replied. "The online booking system works perfectly when everyone follows the same rules." She paused at the door, calculating one final approach. "Dr. Rodriguez, I hope we can move past this morning's misunderstanding. In my defense, the board kept your identity completely confidential." "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "They did exactly as I asked." After she left, I decided to make one more visit to the basement myself. What I found there reinforced everything I'd observed during my 3-week reconnaissance. The basement conference room was exactly as depressing as I'd remembered. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sickly shadows across peeling wallpaper. That musty odor hung heavy in the air, and I could see the water damage I'd mentioned to Pat, dark stains spreading across the corners like some kind of institutional disease. But despite the grim surroundings, the room buzzed with energy. 6 researchers huddled around a table meant for 20, their voices animated as they discussed their work. These were the people Pat had systematically sidelined, the ones whose ideas threatened the established order. "Don't mind me," I said, taking a seat in the back corner. "Please continue." They exchanged uncertain glances before a young woman with bright eyes and determined expression stood up. This was Ashley Murphy, whose work I'd been following. "As I was saying," she continued, "our new synthesis method shows 94% efficiency in early-stage protein development, compared to current industry standards of 76%. She clicked to the next slide, which refused to advance. The ancient projector wheezed and hummed, its fans struggling against years of accumulated dust. She tapped the remote repeatedly before sighing. "Technology down here is always temperamental," she said. "Here, let me try," offered an older researcher, fiddling with cables behind the machine. "Ashley's work deserves to be seen properly. It could revolutionize drug development if given proper support." I watched Ashley's presentation unfold, marveling at its elegance. Her methodology was brilliant, a simple adaptation that could accelerate pharmaceutical research while reducing costs by millions. Yet here she was, presenting in a moldy basement while conference rooms upstairs sat empty. "Have you presented this to the department heads?" I asked when she finished. Ashley's shoulders tensed. "4 times. Each time I was told it needs more development before receiving consideration for institute resources." "While Dr. Stephen Coleman got full funding for his derivative imaging study last month," muttered another researcher. "His approach is basically a rehash of work from the 1990s. Dr. Coleman has worked closely with Miss Williams for 15 years, Ashley explained quietly. "He's part of the inner circle." I nodded, making notes. "And how many of you regularly use this space?" All 6 raised their hands. "We call ourselves the Basement Brigade," said a lanky researcher with kind eyes. "Anyone doing work that challenges established methodologies eventually ends up down here." "Yet you stay," I observed. Ashley straightened her shoulders. "The science matters more than the surroundings. Even if we're invisible here, the work isn't. We support each other, share resources, collaborate in ways the upstairs people never do." As I listened to them discuss their projects, I realized something important. These weren't just talented researchers being suppressed, they were the future of this institute. Their energy, their willingness to challenge conventional thinking, their collaborative spirit, this was exactly what Westfield needed to reclaim its reputation. I left with their research summaries and a deeper sense of purpose. Pat Williams had created a system that not only wasted talent but actively drove innovation underground. Tomorrow's board meeting wouldn't just be about exposing her failures, it would be about elevating these researchers to where they belonged. That evening, as I reviewed my presentation one final time, I thought about Maria Santos again. She never got the chance to present her breakthrough research because the system crushed her first. But Ashley Murphy and her colleagues wouldn't suffer the same fate. Not on my watch. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room. When I arrived 15 minutes early, Pat was already there, arranging materials at each seat like she was hosting a dinner party. She'd clearly spent the night preparing her counterattack. "Dr. Rodriguez, I've prepared briefing materials for your introduction," she said, handing me a folder filled with talking points that painted the Institute in glowing terms. "I've highlighted key achievements you might want to reference." "Thanks, but I've prepared my own presentation." Her smile didn't waver, but I caught a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Of course, but as someone new to our academic culture, you might find these institutional insights valuable. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings about how things work here." "I appreciate the offer," I said, connecting my laptop to the display system. "But I believe I've developed a reasonably accurate understanding during my observation period." When the board members and department heads filed in, I could see the curiosity mixed with apprehension in their faces. Some I recognized as Pat's inner circle: Dr. Stephen Coleman, Dr. Janet Pierce, Dr. Michael Torres, the ones whose projects always got approved, whose labs always had the newest equipment. They took their usual seats at the main table with practiced confidence. Others entered more hesitantly. These were the researchers whose work had been systematically sidelined, who'd learned to expect disappointment from administrative decisions. They gravitated toward chairs along the walls, conditioned by years of implicit hierarchy. Ashley Murphy and her basement colleagues hovered near the door, clearly uncomfortable about entering what they'd been taught was not their space. "Please," I gestured toward the empty chairs at the main table. Join us. Every perspective is important today. Pat's smile tightened as she watched her carefully maintained order being disrupted. Dr. Rodriguez, she said smoothly, we typically follow established seating protocols for meeting efficiency. Not today, I replied simply. When everyone was settled, I began without any warm-up pleasantries. For 3 weeks, I've observed this institute not as its director, but as an ordinary researcher. What I've discovered has been both revealing and deeply troubling. The room went quiet as data appeared on the screen behind me. Not accusations or opinions, but hard numbers showing resource allocation patterns, project approval rates, and career advancement trajectories. Everything correlated with proximity to administrative favor rather than scientific merit or potential. Over the past 5 years, I continued, this institute has lost 28 researchers. 24 of them have gone on to make significant breakthroughs at competing institutions. Meanwhile, our own innovation metrics have declined by 35%, and our grant application success rate has dropped to 23%, well below the national average of 41%. Dr. Coleman, one of Pat's longtime allies, shifted uncomfortably. With respect, Dr. Rodriguez, complex academic institutions require careful resource management. Not every researcher can access premium facilities simultaneously. Absolutely right, I agreed, which is why allocation should correlate with research potential, productivity, and institutional impact, not personal relationships. I clicked to the next slide, a correlation analysis showing the clear pattern between resource access and proximity to Pat's personal network. The data told its own damning story. Researchers in her favor circle received an average of 340% more funding, 280% better facility access, and 450% more conference opportunities than those outside it. This analysis covers the past 36 months, I explained. Every resource allocation decision, every facility assignment, every opportunity distribution. The pattern is mathematically undeniable. Board Chairman Dr. Robert Hayes leaned forward, studying the numbers. These are significant disparities. They represent systematic institutional bias, I continued. Dr. Ashley Murphy's protein synthesis research, which has now been licensed by 4 pharmaceutical companies, was conducted entirely in basement facilities, while receiving less than 15% of the resources allocated to projects that produced 0 commercial applications. Ashley sat straighter, surprise flickering across her face at being mentioned prominently. Pat maintained perfect composure, but I noticed her pen gripping tighter in her hands. Individual project outcomes can't be predicted in advance, she interjected. Resource allocation must consider factors beyond immediate commercial potential. Such as? I asked. Researcher experience, institutional relationships, administrative feasibility, long-term strategic alignment. Her voice carried the practiced authority of 20 years in power. Interesting criteria, I said, advancing to the next slide. Because none of those factors correlate with the actual success metrics I've analyzed. However, there is one factor that predicts resource allocation with 89% accuracy. The final chart appeared, a simple graph showing resource distribution against social proximity to Pat Williams's personal network. The room fell completely silent. The correlation was so clear, so undeniable, that even Pat's strongest allies couldn't dispute it. This isn't about assigning blame to individuals, I clarified, watching Pat's expression remain carefully neutral. Systems evolve over time, often with unintended consequences. Our responsibility now is systematic correction, not personal retribution. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined comprehensive reforms: transparent resource allocation based on blind peer review, merit-based facility assignment with rotating access schedules, anonymous reporting systems for bias or favoritism, external auditing of all major funding decisions. Throughout my presentation, Pat took careful notes, nodding at appropriate moments. To anyone watching, she appeared engaged and supportive. Only the slight tremor in her hands and the way she avoided direct eye contact with her usual allies betrayed her mounting distress. Finally, I reached the crucial moment. To implement these changes effectively, we need leadership that understands both the current system and the reforms necessary to transform it. The room held its breath. Everyone expected Pat's demotion or dismissal. Therefore, I'm creating a new position, Director of Institutional Equity and Transparency. This role will oversee implementation of all reform protocols, maintain public accountability measures, and ensure sustained compliance with merit-based allocation principles. Confusion rippled through the room. Where was the axe falling? Ms. Williams, I continued, your 20 years of institutional knowledge make you uniquely qualified for this position. You'll chair a new oversight committee comprising researchers from all levels and divisions, including those currently working in basement facilities. Understanding dawned slowly in Pat's eyes. She wasn't being fired, she was being transformed. Every policy she would now enforce directly contradicted her previous 2 decades of actions. Every monthly report she would file would document the very inequities she had created and maintained. You want me to dismantle my own systems, she said quietly. I want you to evolve them, I corrected. Your intimate knowledge of current processes makes you ideal for guiding their transformation into something genuinely merit-based. Board Chairman Hayes was nodding approvingly. Institutional continuity during reform, very wise approach. Pat sat perfectly still, processing the elegant trap I'd constructed. Public disgrace avoided, but compelled to become the architect of everything she'd spent 20 years opposing. As the meeting concluded, department heads filed out with thoughtful expressions. Some looked relieved that change was finally coming. Others seemed unsettled by the scope of reforms ahead. Ashley Murphy and her basement colleagues left with cautious hope, stealing glances back as if fearing this transformation might evaporate once they were out of sight. Pat remained seated after everyone had gone, her perfect composure finally cracking around the edges. Why not simply fire me? She asked when we were alone. This position you've created. It's precisely designed to contradict everything I've built here, because this role aligns perfectly with your stated values, I replied. You've repeatedly emphasized your dedication to maintaining excellence and institutional standards. Now you'll enforce different standards, ones based on actual merit rather than personal connections. You're making an example of me, she said, her voice hardening. Public rehabilitation disguised as opportunity. No, Pat, I'm offering genuine transformation. Your institutional knowledge is valuable, but its application needs fundamental correction. You can either grow with this change or resist it, but the old system ends either way. She gathered her materials, dignity reassembling around her like armor. I've outlasted 3 directors before you, Dr. Rodriguez. I'm aware, I said calmly. Each time you waited them out, then gradually restored familiar patterns once their attention moved elsewhere. She paused at the door, meeting my eyes directly. That won't happen this time? No, I said. Because unlike my predecessors, I didn't come here for career advancement or prestige. I came to solve a specific problem, and I'm not leaving until it's fixed. 8 months later, the transformation was complete, and it exceeded even my expectations. The first major victory came just 6 weeks after the board meeting. Ashley Murphy's protein synthesis research secured $1.8 million in federal funding from the National Institute of Health. Her methodology was already being adopted by research teams at Johns Hopkins and Stanford. The basement conference room where she'd been forced to present her early work had been converted into the Innovation Collaboration Lab, a state-of-the-art facility that researchers now competed to book time in. But the real measure of success wasn't in individual achievements, it was in the systematic changes that made those achievements possible. Pat Williams, now Director of Institutional Equity and Transparency, had become the most thorough enforcer of merit-based policies the Institute had ever seen. Not because she wanted to, but because every decision she made was transparently documented and publicly reviewed. Her monthly equity reports had become models that other research institutions requested copies of. The transformation hadn't been easy for her. I'd watched her struggle with implementing policies that directly contradicted 20 years of practiced behavior. But gradually, something unexpected happened. As she saw talented researchers flourish under fair resource allocation, as innovative projects advanced based on merit rather than connections, her resistance softened into something approaching genuine conviction. You know, she told me during one of our monthly reviews, I'd forgotten how exciting real breakthrough research could be. When I started here 20 years ago, that's what drew me to this work. The numbers told the story better than any individual anecdote. Researcher retention had improved by 78%. Grant application success rates had climbed from 23% to 47%, well above national averages. Most importantly, research output had increased by 42%, with 16 major innovations currently in various stages of commercial development. The basement brigade had been disbanded, not because they'd been suppressed, but because they no longer needed to hide underground. Ashley Murphy now headed the new Early Career Researcher Initiative. Dr. Sarah Kim, whose climate adaptation research had been ignored for 3 years, received a joint appointment with MIT. Dr. James Wright's medical device innovations had spawned 2 startup companies. Even Dr. Coleman, Pat's former ally, had adapted to the new reality. Without guaranteed resource access based on connections, he'd been forced to elevate his research quality. His recent publication on neural pathway mapping was actually his strongest work in years. I often thought about Maria Santos during those months. She'd contacted me after news of Westfield's transformation spread through academic circles. "I heard what you did there," she wrote in her email. "It gives me hope that maybe I made the right choice leaving when I did, and that the next generation won't have to face what I faced." That email meant more to me than any board commendation or industry recognition. The real test came during our first major external review. Federal auditors spent 2 weeks examining our reformed allocation processes. Their conclusion was unequivocal. Westfield had become a model for merit-based research administration. We were invited to present our transformation methodology at the National Science Foundation's annual conference. Standing in that same Hamilton conference room where Pat had once blocked my access, I watched Ashley Murphy practice her keynote presentation for the NSF conference. She'd been selected as the lead presenter, not because of connections or politics, but because her research represented the best of what institutional transformation could achieve. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said after finishing her practice run, "I wanted to thank you, not just for the opportunities, but for showing us that systems can actually change." "You earned every opportunity yourself," I replied. "I just removed the artificial barriers that were preventing your talent from being recognized." As I reflected on the past 8 months, I realized that leadership at 48 had taught me something crucial. Real transformation isn't about dramatic gestures or wholesale replacement of people. It's about creating systems where everyone's best work can emerge naturally, where merit is rewarded consistently, and where artificial hierarchies can't override genuine talent. Pat Williams was still here, still influential, but now her influence served institutional goals rather than personal preferences. Ashley Murphy was thriving not because someone gave her special treatment, but because she finally had fair access to the resources her brilliance deserved. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't destruction, it's reconstruction, especially when the architect of the problem becomes the builder of the solution, not through choice initially, but through the relentless logic of systems designed for actual excellence rather than its appearance. That's what real leadership looks like. Not the flashy moves or quick fixes, but the patience to observe, the wisdom to plan, and the conviction to see meaningful change through to completion. The greatest victory in any organization isn't defeating your opponents. It's building systems so robust that merit wins regardless of who's in charge. Real leadership at our age isn't about proving we're right. It's about creating environments where the next generation can be brilliant without having to fight the battles we fought.